Hey everyone, Curse Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks assisted, and here we are with Loot, the Key to Everything. An impulse deck is what I'm gonna call it, as it's completely centered around the impulsive draw mechanic. This is one of our donation decks of the week, comes from Lexa, who says, "The card advantage this little guy can create seems nuts. I'm trying to find a good balance of all the different card types, including Kindred, to get the most out of Loot each turn. Would love another set of eyes." Absolutely. I'm very excited to take a look at this deck because honestly, there's a lot here I like, and the deck building restriction of having quite a few different types of cards is really interesting to me. And how to best leverage it, well, I've got a few ideas here and there. So let's get into it and find out what Loot does. If you'd like to take a look at the deck list we're talking about today, or if you'd like to submit your own deck list to me so that I can make a video assisting your deck, please check the video description down below. So who is Loot, the Key to Everything, and why are they our Impulse Commander? Loot is green, blue, red, that's Naya, 3 mana total for a Beast Noble, 1/2 with Ward 1. They have one ability. At the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top X cards of your library, where X is the number of card types among other non-land permanents you control. You may play those cards this turn. This is the impulsive draw that they gave Red quite a long time ago, right around when I had started, or maybe a little further, where the best solution for Red's card advantage was to give it temporary card advantage. Cards exiled are not cards in hand, but it's easier to exile cards generally than it is to draw cards. Loot, for that reason, is very capable of impulsively drawing quite a few cards very easily. In fact, I would say Loot impulsively drawing 2 cards per upkeep is like the bare minimum. I think it's reasonable for 3 or 4 cards to be impulsively drawn each turn. And with a commander like that, we have quite a bit of variance in the cards that we have. And for me, the main things I think I take from Loot is that I want this to be kind of... We have card advantage from Loot that's temporary, so we want to be able to cast the spells we exile. In exchange for that, we probably want a lot of ramp, because we are in the colors of ramp. So I see this as kind of like a mid-rangey good stuff deck that has a very high ceiling on the amount of cards and mana it can generate. Looking at the deck itself, I'm pretty happy with a lot of it. 37 lands is good. The curve is very much so on 2 mana and kind of trails off. I think this is a pretty good place to start on a first draft. And we're going to talk about this latter half in a second, but I do generally like the kind of how much we're focused on the early mana, because the second we can start getting mana going, we can start using Loot, and then we can start, casting these spells and getting away with it. The game, I mean. I will say, the thing, and the reason I want to kind of start by nitpicking the higher mana cards, is that the problem with impulsive draw is that we only have 1 turn to cast these cards. So when Flaming Tyrannosaurus is revealed, well, we can't really do much with it if we don't have that 7 mana, and that card is gone forever, which is too bad because it's a particularly powerful card. So what I generally want to do is to have as many mid to low mana cards and our ability to cast multiple of them a turn, right? If we exile 5-ish cards, like that's the dream, let's say creature, artifact, enchantment, planeswalker, battle, right? That's the most we can get. I think there are a few kindred enchantments that would make it just a little more, but I think it's reasonable to hit 5. And if we have those in play and we pseudo draw 5, if we're not casting like 3 of them, we've kind of wasted the ability to an extent, is my opinion. So let's start by looking at everything basically 4 mana and up and seeing to what degree we should be playing it. Starting with our Planeswalkers. Chandra Torch of Defiance I really do like here because it works on theme and generates mana, so overall a fantastic card. Minsk and Boo is an incredibly powerful commander in these colors, but I will note they don't really work with the theme. I think I'd generally be okay with any form of Planeswalker here instead. And in fact, I think, like, look at Narset Parter Veils and how strong that is for the deck, whereas Minsk and Boo just kind of create a blocker in a way, like a 4/4. And though that, don't get me wrong, that is a very good like attacker and blocker, I don't know if that's exactly where you want to be, especially at 4 mana. I'm not going to be too hard on it because late game it's very, very strong, especially with the card draw on it, but it is notably not on theme. Tamiyo as well, is also kind of like, I wish this card created artifacts or enchantments or anything like this, but instead it's kind of more creating copies. It has a few tapping things. It just also, like, it does create an artifact, don't get me wrong, but as an ultimate, this card just feels kind of okay. I almost prefer, I think, let's say the other Tamiyo from the Collector of Tales, where you have a really nice anti-sacrifice effect. You have a self-mill effect, which I think if you can use cards, which we do know we have, to see the top cards of our deck, we can use this as kind of a draw. If not, it mills cards to our graveyard, which can be useful, and then buys back those cards. So I think this would be a better Tamiyo generally, even though it's not as flashy or splashy as the completed Sage. Moving on to creatures, let's start with Durnan of the Yawning Portal. Durnan works very much so like our commander in the sense that we are impulsively drawing off the top. However, notably, it is attached to a much worse creature, only is used on creatures, which is a 5th of our deck, and is just overall worse because it's not even upkeep, it has to be on attack. Though there is synergy with the exile effects, and we will get into that in a second, I just don't think this is good enough. This is the kind of card that you're going to cast, and like, when you are behind, this is a terrible, terrible card, right? If you have, and like, sorry, even if you're ahead and behind, right? Like, if you have your commander out and you play this the turn before, and you get to upkeep and you exile cards, and then you play Durnan, or you attack with Durnan and you get another card to exile, like, if you have that going on and you're not ahead, this does nothing for you. Like, you are even further behind, because the thing that's probably holding you back is the lack of mana, and the Undaunted, which does reduce the mana cost of that creature, is not going to be very relevant outside of maybe reducing these specific creatures, which means not only do you need to hit one of your 18 creatures, you have to actually hit one of your 10 creatures, and I think I'm including this, so one of your 9 creatures that is somewhat relevant to hit with this. And I think the odds of that are very, very low. Iraxa, Empress of Mars. I don't really like this. I get how it works with our commander, but it is a card that has a really weird synergy with itself. Like, the battle cry only happens if you have the creatures, which it generates, but only generates those creatures if you cast cards outside of your hand, which it can't do by itself. Like, you can cast your commander to get a trigger off of this, but like, that's not very good. It's a 5/4, it has trample, it has battle cry. I really don't like this card. It just feels kind of off theme, though they, you know, Luke kind of looks like an alien, and I do appreciate that. I don't think these two cards synergize particularly well, and I think if you exile like any 3 cards out of this deck, I think Iraxa will be kind of the last one you want to cast. Let's see, Osgood. Osgood has the same Paradox ability. I like this more because the Paradox ability creates an artifact. I do really like that Osgood then, like, you know, puts mana into those artifacts and starts cracking those clues. But even then, like, we can use this to cast one of 13 artifacts, maybe also including like Reality Ship. It just feels like this is too much mana. Like, it is specific ramp, but it's too specific. Like, if this even just said historic spells and abilities, I would be a lot less hard on it. But this is 4 mana to get 2 mana dorks that only work in specific ways in your deck. And then it won't trigger off itself entering the battlefield from exile. You have to then cast a second spell in order to do it. So once again, too many hoops to jump through. I want to keep this low. This is just going to be consistent throughout this. And now we can talk about this clause here, which a few cards have. Spells you cast from anywhere other than your hand cost 1 less to cast. So here's what I want to say about this. I don't dislike this ability. I think we can also find this ability on like 3 mana cards, I believe, and a bunch of different ones. But if we're going this route, I think we need to heavily invest in artifacts. And if we're not doing that, I don't particularly like this. Because here's the kind of dichotomy of this card, right? So these abilities are good. They work really well as the first copy of this, because if you have 4 cards there, and this can trigger off of the 4 cards, which means they need to have colored mana symbols, so like cards like Birds of Paradise and Dock or Lock won't count, or if you hit a lot of lands, it won't do anything. But if you have multiple cards with a colorless mana requirement, this stacks really, really well by itself. And then copies of this card also stack pretty well. However, cards like Savvy Trader and much more importantly, Sage of the Beyond themselves cost quite a bit to cast. I would say the Savvy Trader is good enough, but the other ones, if you're going 5 mana and higher, whereas we're going to get the most out of this ability, we come back to the same problem as before. Because if we have, for example, revealed a bunch of these 2 mana artifacts, then wow, Savvy Trader is amazing. Very, very good card. Even better if we have 2 copies of this ability, all of a sudden we're casting all of those spells for free. 10 out of 10. However, if we reveal a bunch of these 7 to 5 mana cards, or even 4 mana and above, even with Savvy Trader's ability, we're not going to be able to cast them all. And so the deck construction and the mana value of these cards is actually holding back the card that is meant to help them. I hope that makes sense. I still think this is good, but I wouldn't use anything higher than 4 mana for this. And once again, I think the main goal is to reduce the mana cost. Timeless Witness, I think, is fantastic. Just another E-Wit is very strong in this deck. Wild Mage Sorcerer, this is definitely good enough, I think. This ability, this Paradox ability, is much better than the others, and I think you're going to get a lot of reasonable hits with it. Obviously, we're going to talk about 1 mana spells when our Cascade idea is that our highest is 2 mana. That's probably not good. We probably want to, if we want 2 mana to be the highest CMC of the deck, which I think is fine, we need more 1 mana cards, which I am going to suggest, even maybe 1 or 2 0 mana cards. However, at this moment, you need to be able to reasonably cast, where is it again? The Wild Mage Sorcerer, and then a 3 mana card from Exile in order to reasonably hit something good. Or else you're getting Birds of Paradise. What were the other hits? Birds of Paradise, Carpet of Flowers, or Witness Protections. Which Carpet and Birds are pretty good, and Witness Protection is kind of dependent on the board. Moving on, we have Kami of Celebration. This feels, this is a kind of, what would we call this? What was the original Magus of the... Oh, I can't remember the name of this kind of mechanic, but that doesn't matter. This works with our commander in the sense that we have cards off the top of our deck that we want to cast, and this is a way of casting cards off the top of your deck. I will say, this is maybe a little too specific. Now, unlike the other ones, I really do like that it kind of fuels itself. Its Paradox ability puts counters on creatures, which makes them modify, which then allows you to cast, attack with them, which then allows you to cast them. Like, this whole kind of synergy going on, big fan. However, herein lies the problem. We don't have tons of creatures we want to attack with. Let's look at our low mana creatures, right? A lot of them are too weak or either not worth attacking with, or, you know, literally can't attack when it's doing the thing it wants to do. Beyond that, we have Loot, who also we really don't want to be attacking with, as a 2/3 with that first counter. So what, we're going to put extra counters on it? That doesn't feel good. I guess Ewit is fine, but a lot of our other creatures generally do not want to attack. And once again, we just don't have that many creatures. So with that all in mind, I just don't think this is the best version of this kind of ability. I think we have better choices, and I have a few suggestions that I think will just do a little better. Keeper of Secrets, once again, we have the same text here of the paradox, and too much. Too much. I think this only hits one opponent. It doesn't hit any target. It's a 6/4 haste for 6 mana. It's too much. You will be much happier to cast several low mana cards, I would say, rather than only casting this from exile. Or only casting this from hand, because this feels even worse when it's hand. Flaming Tyrannosaurus, I really do like this. It's very, very strong. Even though this was the first thing I pointed out, this is also the one I'm willing to keep, because I think the paradox is so strong, and that, you know what? You're most likely willing to cast this Flaming Tyrannosaurus if you are able, which is the big asterisk. If you are able to cast this, you will. If you're not, you're basically exiling one of the best cards in your deck. That's Magic, that's Red Impulse, I think it'll be fine. Sage of the Beyond, I've already talked about. I'm not very much so a fan of this card. It is too clunky, it's too much mana, and it'll take you a whole turn to help your next turn, whereas once again, a lot of the ways we want to use this, you could probably just have a better time using artifact mana reduction, and having artifacts being the majority of the cards you want to cast. But that's not where we want to be. We want to have a nice variety of cards, so generally, I don't like it. Tlin, oh my goodness. Tlin Kali Hunter. So this I have a hard time with. This is one of those cards that's like both really good, but also really not good in the terms of how it works with the deck. So this is much better than Sage, the Sage from Beyond, in what it does. It works really well with the deck. It works really well with the higher mana cards. It has a really high ceiling, and that's all it needs to be, which I really like. Now, it only hits creatures, which, okay, not ideal. It specifically cannot work with our commander, also not ideal. And the whole retrieve prey adventure thing, it kind of works with our idea because we cast it from graveyard, but like, we need a target creature in our graveyard, and so with only 20 creatures or 18 creatures, the ability to get this off is pretty low. So what I'm going to say is this card is really good, but just not in this version of the deck. If we went higher into creatures, we went higher into artifact creatures, for example, I think this would be a lot better. But as it is right now, I think this is just an unreliable card that will feel incredibly clunky. There's just going to be situations where you can't use the adventure, which is half the point of how this card works, and then you're just holding on to it to play it for 7 mana to sometimes be able to cast a creature. So current build, I don't like it, but we can build into it. Moving quickly through our sorceries and instants, because they're all very low mana, I am a very big fan of all of these cards, and I have no problems with them. Our artifacts as well, I generally very much so like. I like the amount of ramp. I think it's appropriate for what the deck does. I like some of the cute, like River Song Diary. Altar of the Goyf, I think is fine. Maybe a little too cute for a deck you're not going to want to attack a bunch with, but it is rather cool. And I think Knowledge Pool. So Knowledge Pool and Possibility Storm, I think let's not do this. I think it's cool. I think there's interesting things you can do. Like Possibility Storm, at least I like more because of how it works. Like Possibility Storm is chaotic enough to disrupt our opponents meaningfully, whereas Knowledge Pool is halfway there. Like the main idea for those who may not be understanding why these cards are here is both of these cards punish players for casting spells normally in a deck that has a really easy way to cast things from exile instead. And with that in mind, you get to kind of skirt around this ability that's usually detrimental while your opponents have to deal with it. The problem with Knowledge Pool is dramatically worse because opponents do eventually get to cast the spell they wanted to cast. So what this does, right? Imagine this. Okay, so they have a board clear. So they cast a board clear. Unfortunately, it won't happen. So they exile it and they cast another card from Knowledge Pool, right? And then they cast a Mana Dork, get back the board clear that they exiled with Knowledge Pool and cast it immediately, right? So Knowledge Pool just doesn't stop your opponents from doing what they want to. It just makes it a little clunkier, to the point that your opponents will just work together to destroy the Knowledge Pool, because like I'll cast Beast Within, and in exchange for that, I'll cast something else, and then I turn to my next opponent and go, hey, do you want to cast that Beast Within and destroy Knowledge Pool? Just cast something else. And they'll be like, yeah, okay, that makes sense. I want to be able to play my own cards normally. Let's do that. In the meantime, your first opponent, me, has gotten the best card out of Knowledge Pool and has basically wasted my opponent's like a part of their turn and their mana in order to stop the thing. Like, I get the most advantage out of this and you don't. So Knowledge Pool feels particularly weak, but Possibility Storm, I think I'm a lot more on the side of it. I think this is very fun and cool here. Also, enchantments are harder to get than artifacts, so I'm happier cutting an artifact than an enchantment. Altar of Goyf, just going back for a second, both of these cards are also 5 to 6 mana, but with cost reducers, especially the ones that hit artifacts, I don't mind as well. The last ones here before we move on, I didn't talk about the battles because I love them. I absolutely love them, so we can just move on from them. Is the Flux. I like the Flux. I think the Flux is fine. I'm hesitant. I really like this ability a lot more on like a more artifact themed deck, but I think generally this is just going to be good enough that you're happy with it. All right, so that's generally what I want to talk about the deck itself. Let's talk about additions and ideas that I have in directions this deck can go in. And some of these will be suggestions in terms of things I think the deck will be good with, and at least one or two are like, this is an idea you can run with if you so choose to. So, oops, I never closed this one. So let's talk about 1 mana auras. And the cycle I want to talk about is Wild Growth, Utopia Sprawl, and Abundant Growth. And the reason I want to talk about these is, 1, I want more 1 mana cards in your deck. And 2, I want more variety in the kind of like enchantments, especially I want a few more enchantments. And 3, I want ramp. Now, notably, Abundant Growth is not ramp, but it is card draw. So I don't mind this as much for mana fixing, and also its ability to be cast off of loot in a very like fun and easy way, because it immediately cycles itself, so it feels pretty free to cast. Utopia Sprawl, only downside is that it's a chain of forest and you pick a color, and Wild Growth just makes green. But the ramp these cards provide, the ease of casting them off of loot, and the fact that they'll give you the easiest one, because enchantments I'd say are one of the harder enchantments. So I would say planeswalkers and battles are the hardest, then enchantments, then artifacts, then creatures. So though you don't really, there are no 1 mana battles or 1 mana planeswalkers, so the next best thing on that list is enchantments. So these are really, really strong. And I also want these to be a placeholder that you could be playing more mana dorks. I have a few in here, but you could play more. You have access to them. I think you should play them. They're easy to cast off of loot, and they each turn kind of make your next turn a little better. Now moving on, I wanted to look at things that create 2 permanents at once of different types. So Knight of Sweet's Revenge was the first one that I saw at 4 mana. ETB, it's an enchantment that creates an artifact. Now, what I really like about it is that food is like a Mox Emerald. It taps for green mana instantly, and I really like that. And we can definitely, I'm going to show a few cards that I was thinking of food as well, but you can delve into this as deep or as little as you want. I really like how these 2 things work, and I like that Knight of Sweet's Revenge comes with its own kind of win condition should you want to go into food. It is 4 mana, it is a bit clunky. If you're not going too much into food, I wouldn't play it, and I'm not sure I would put it in right away. It's just kind of an idea that I wanted to throw out there, and it's probably the weaker versions of the next few cards I'm going to show. Gilded Goose is the better version of the previous card. It immediately comes in as a 1 mana creature, immediately creates an artifact, and you're up to 2 for loot. It also notably taps for mana. Though you lose the food token, you can always create a new one off the Gilded Goose. This allows for a turn 2 loot. Unfortunately, it only impulse draws 1 if you get rid of the food, but it is an interesting card, and if you were to lean further into food, which once again, there might be 1 or 2 more cards, I think the other ones are clues, but we'll see. You could do that, and you would have a pretty big benefit to doing so. Yes, this is a clue one. Ongoing Investigation, same kind of thing. This is an enchantment that makes artifacts. This one is maybe a little tougher because I wanted to put this in because this card is very unique, and you almost never see it because Clue, Food, any of those decks that aren't specifically blue-green cannot play it. So I wanted to give a shout out because it's something people forget about. This is really interesting because if you are into a more attacking kind of style of deck, which the current deck isn't, you can get a lot of clues. And if you have more creatures, you can also investigate and gain 2 life. Like overall, it does the thing of making enchantments and it does the thing of making artifacts, so I like it. The one I really want to suggest, though it is at 3 mana, is one I really like, which is Weirding Wood. And I think this is like the upgraded version of like Utopia style cards, where on ETB you get a clue, so this is an enchantment and an artifact, once again at the same time. However, it is also ramp. I really do like this, especially when later you have the artifacts anyways, you can then immediately crack the clue to get card advantage. Really, really good, kind of a safe play, and I do particularly like it. Speaking of mana ramp and things being enchantments and other things, Dryad of Elysian Grove is really, really good in this deck. It is about $10, so I can't just willy-nilly advocate for it, but it works in both being like, first of all, obviously, it is an enchantment creature, which is exactly where you want to be. But also, it fixes your mana, which I think is relevant with a 3-color commander in a 3-color deck. But this play an additional land on each of your turns, I think is going to be really relevant with loot. Now, I didn't put Azusa in because I thought it was maybe going too much, but there's going to be situations where you're going to impulsively draw more than 1 land at a time, or you're going to impulsively draw a land and have a land in your hand. And so, you know, it's the correct play to play the land from impulse first before the one in your hand, but there'll be situations where you need the color from the land in your hand, or you need to play that one, and so you're just losing one of those impulsive draws for no reason, right? Dryad of Elysian Grove takes a little bit of pressure off of that, allowing you to play 2 lands, not only ramping, not only getting you further in the game, but also letting you use more of that impulse. Likewise, Escape to the Wilds exists in this really kind of cool space where it kind of simulates your commander and also does everything you want it to do. So it does the whole thing where it lets you exile the top 5, and you have 2 turns to cast it, but also lets you play an additional land, immediately getting advantage of a land that's been exiled from Escape to the Wilds. Really, really good, but also late game, when you have a bunch of ramp, Escape to the Wilds is a bomb of a card that basically says draw 5 if you're able to cast or play all 5 cards. Very, very strong, and I think you'll be really, really happy. And this is the kind of card that I really want to see in the late game out of this deck. One that like torpedoes you ahead of your opponents. Speaking of casting spells off the top of your deck or exile, Fibblethip kind of caught my eye. It's kind of unique. Now, I don't know if I like this Fibblethip. I don't know if I like Fibblethip in general as a character, but here, having a Ward 2 1/1 is really nice, and being able to plot the cards off the top of your deck is interesting. Traditionally, I would like this a little less than I would to be able to just cast them. But in a deck like this, I'm not too sure. There's a lot of situations I think that I would rather plot a lot of these cards than immediately cast them. Especially if I have a ton of mana and I'm able to just plot 2 or 3 cards. Blasphemous Act, for example. Actually, Blasphemous Act. I don't think plot allows you to... Do you cast? You must exit play the plot cost. Yeah, so you don't cast it, so things like Blasphemous Act don't work really well, but being able to put out a few cards, creatures, like plotting an Ewit is one of the much more powerful things you can do, and what I really like is that after you plot it into exile, some of those paradox spells get better because you get to plan around them. So I think this is uniquely good. I think there's a few other plot cards you could probably play. I think, going back for a second, the Savvy Trader. Yeah, Savvy Trader doesn't have plot. I feel like it should, but I think there is another card that has both plot and the mana reduction. But I think plot is really, really interesting for this deck, and definitely something I would use to kind of make the most of the cards you have and kind of plan a long game. I wanted to add Slip Out the Back. I just want our commander to have a little more protection. This is gonna stand-in card. This could also be any of the green 1-mana protections. This could be, I don't know, Dispel. This could be Offer You Can't Refuse. But I really like Slip Out the Back, and after that, maybe I would play the Tyvar card, which is Tyvar Stand after that to give your commander hexproof and indestructible. And I think these are just good to have around in a deck like this. I know they're not very much so on theme, especially because we can see that we want to be low on sorceries and instants because our deck is mainly based around our permanents. But having some protection for our commander so he can make that turn cycle, especially because our opponents are going to know when we have enough permanents of different types that we're going to get a really good turn, they might be keen on interacting with loot. So having a few cards to stop that, I think, is nice. Finally, well, second finally, cards and a win condition I wanted to talk about. Now, this is kind of contentious, so I wanted to somewhat hesitate, but I think this is the kind of deck that, you know, take another turn spells are so good in. You'll have to decide if this is the angle you want to go in. It's not free, both in monetary cost, both in spell cost, and both in the friends. I guess both not, and triple with the friends you're gonna lose along the way. But Time Warp and other take another turn spells work fantastic in this deck, where you get to cast them off loot and dig for them on the next turn for the next take another turn spell. They aren't a win condition of themselves, but in a deck like this where you can amass so much mana and so much advantage, having a few extra turns here and there will set you up in a situation where you can win by any means necessary, right? This also obviously works really well with our planeswalkers. This works well with battles, getting extra attacks in. There's a lot we can do here, and I do really like it. I don't know if it'll make the deck into something you're going to really like, but I really wanted to suggest it. Now, the exact opposite direction for the last card I want to suggest is Rites of Flourishing, and I wanted to suggest Group Hug to an extent. I don't know if this is a good idea, but I'm going to pitch it anyways. Group Hug decks are a lot of fun. You are basically using cards that universally help the entire playgroup, and you know that you will set up so opponents don't pressure you because they don't want to mess with you too much, and they're going to kind of interact with each other because all of a sudden they have a bunch of advantage. Rites of Flourishing, for example, gives you extra draws and gets you extra lands, two things we really like in a deck like this. In exchange for that, the Group Hug deck often will try to set itself up into a turn where either it combos off to win or creates such like unbelievable advantage with like Omniscience and a bunch of recurable cards that their opponents are basically locked out of the game and the Group Hug player wins right away. And I think loot very specifically works in this kind of idea, both thematically and also in a deck building thing. The thing with Group Hug decks is they tend to be more varied in card types. They don't usually like fully go into creatures, though they're usually enchantment and artifact decks. They do have creatures as well. They play planeswalkers. Like, it already has the shape of what loot brings, so it's a nice kind of way to play the deck. But also, and this is more important, is it works in flavor. Loot is a cute, untrustworthy little monster, and that's what it feels like to play Group Hug. I hope this has been helpful to you. Loot's really cool. I'm really interested to see the kind of build I'm going to see out of this. I think, like I said, to sum it up, I think my big concern is the higher mana stuff. I think I'd rather be low to the ground and maximize what loot does. But if you wanted to go in other directions, I've named a few, from the artifact side to the time warp side to the food side, which is, I guess, the artifact side to an extent, but a little different, and to the Group Hug side. I think all of these are ways to play this, and I think this is a really good start of a deck, and I'm really excited to see where it goes. Thank you so much, Alexa. Thank you for sending me this deck. Good luck and happy deck building. Thank you so much for watching. This video is brought to you by viewers like you and people on my Patreon. If you'd like to send me another draft of this deck, or any deck, there is a link in the video description down below. And if you'd like to make your deck one of my donation decks I work on, there's a link there too. Finally, if you'd like to like, comment, subscribe. I would be very appreciative. It helps the channel quite a bit. Thank you and good luck in brewing and building.